Matt Walsh, I have no idea who this guy is, but they wanted to. No. I am actually a really interesting fan of Matt's because I don't always agree with him. In fact, sometimes I am very powerfully disagree with him, but I always admire him. He's known through his writing, podcasts, and speeches as a fierce and articulate defender of truth, moral values, religious liberty, and the Christian faith. You can find him here on the Daily Wire, and his podcast is also on Daily Wire's YouTube channel, Facebook page, and iTunes. And follow him on Twitter at Matt Walsh Blog. Matt, WALSH blog. Matt, how you doing?
Good, Drew. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
To be here.
I'm really glad to talk to you, and congratulations on your globe. It makes you look very intelligent.
Thank you. In fact, I forgot. I don't know if you can see that.
There it is. Yes.
Put it right there. Yes,
you look more intelligent, even just lifting that up made you look much more intelligent.
I know. Thank you.
So I have to tell you, I read your stuff all the time, and I find your point of view incredibly bracing because I'm a much more lax in my devotion to some Christian doctrine than you are, and I have to hold myself up to your opinions and see sometimes if I agree with you. But let us start with something we agree with, which is abortion. And with Kavanaugh, the left is going through its usual panic. We're going to lose Roe v. Wade. We're going to lose everything. And this Tomi Lahren, is that how we pronounce her name? Tomi Lahren had this. Do we have a cut of her? Can we play it? Let's just play what Tomi Lahren said about the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade.
My problem is with some of my fellow conservatives who have put it out there that we are, quote, coming for Roe v. Wade. That is a mistake because we are putting it out there and implying that we are sending a justice to the bench to carry out religious judicial activism, which is a mistake and is unconstitutional. And if we as conservatives are going to imply that, if that's going to be our messaging, we might as well spit on the Constitution. That is not what we stand for. If we are not going to uphold the Constitution on its merit, who will? That is up to us to do. So that my real problem here, regardless of my views on abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, is the messaging of our Supreme Court justice and how he will handle Roe v. Wade if it comes to that point.
Okay, I don't want to coax you into a battle of wits with an unarmed woman, but tell me what's wrong with that point of view.
Oh, what's wrong with it? I mean, do you have 6 or 7 hours I can get into it? What she just said is Nancy Pelosi level leftist garbage. I mean, and when I say Nancy Pelosi level, I mean in how progressive and extreme it is, and also how lazy and frankly stupid that talking point is. It's spitting on the Constitution to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, we also, I don't know if Tomi understands this, but we have to be able to in some ways separate the discussion of Roe v. Wade from the discussion of abortion itself. Because the legal argument against Roe v. Wade is that it was a terrible legal decision where they found in the Constitution a right which is clearly not enumerated. So, the justices in Roe v. Wade, as you know, said that the right to abortion can be found primarily in the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, protects us from having being deprived of life without due process. It also protects us. It says that we get equal justice under the law. So they found in that the codification of our right to kill human beings. I mean, it's madness. So if people were being honest and rational about it, you'd have a bunch of pro-abortion people who said, you know what, I believe abortion's okay, but of course we have to overturn Roe v. Wade because there's nothing in the Constitution about it. So to overturn Roe v. Wade, Tomi, is to undo a previous example, and maybe one of the most heinous examples of judicial activism. So that is not itself judicial activism. That is just righting the ship. That's all that is.
And about abortion itself, let's move it out of the legal realm for a minute. And about abortion itself, this country, I think that Roe v. Wade is what has caused this division in our country. Is there some way that you wrote recently, I think, that you didn't feel that this division could be healed, and abortion is one of the reasons. Do I gather that right?
Yeah, I think that abortion is I think the central foundational issue. I would agree with you in our country because it gets right, and this is one of the reasons why I don't think as conservatives we can say, oh, we have a big tent, and even if you're in favor of killing babies, we can still have you in the tent. Because it's a foundational issue. It gets down to, like, what do you believe? What are your core values and principles? And so me, as a conservative, I consider my core value is, among them, is the sanctity, the sacredness of human life, the worthiness of human life. and also the objective nature of morality, that there is a natural moral law upon which our legal system is based. So it's where you fall on that is kind of going to determine where you fall on abortion, and then from there it's going to determine where you fall on pretty much every other issue. And that is just there's a great chasm there, I think, then separating the two sides, or the various different sides that are themselves splintering into smaller sides. But there's this great chasm that I don't think can be bridged. It would require one side or the other to just give up and say, never mind, we were wrong about this. And I don't think that's going to happen. So all I see is the division growing deeper and deeper.
You know, one of the things I truly admire about you is the integrity with which you hold to your Catholic faith, which is going to keep you from spending eternity with Michael Knowles, among other things.
God willing, God willing.
And what do you say to people who say, gee, all you're trying to do here is impose Catholic Sharia on our free, secular American government? What's your argument to that?
Well, the first thing I say is stop being an idiot, because that's not really an argument, I guess, but that's how I open the argument. Probably not a good strategy. No, what I'm trying to impose is the same foundational doctrine, and it is a doctrine that our founding fathers imposed. I mean, let's remember that the United States is supposed to be different from pretty much every other country that's ever existed in the history of the world, in that it was founded on a creed, on a doctrinal creed, and that is that human rights are innate, are endowed by a creator. They are these objective, real things that are inherent to our nature, and they can't be removed or taken away by any force at all. So I'm just trying to bring us back to that, which is, so my point is, to be pro-life, it does not require you to be Christian, certainly doesn't require you to be Catholic. That's not a Christian or Catholic position. But it is, in some ways, it's a scientific position. It's a position of, well, these are human beings. That's a biological fact. But it's also kind of a spiritual position, in that I'm saying human beings have worth and value. And I admit that is a spiritual conviction. But it is the same spiritual conviction upon which America itself is founded.
Yeah, that's an excellent argument. All right, so let's move on to something where I always disagree with you. Whenever I read your pieces about the arts are all in all to me. I mean, they're the two things I love in life are walking in the forest and enjoying the arts, and those are places where I feel like I am actually in the presence of God. You have written things, for instance, like you feel that it's actually wrong for a Christian to enjoy Game of Thrones, one of my favorite shows ever. Now, and by the way, I should just say you didn't write this in a censorious or hectoring way. You were putting forward a very quiet argument, very calm argument. But isn't there something about the arts that is supposed to show us all of life? Is art supposed to be limited to only the nice and only the good and the beautiful?
No, I don't think it should be limited. I think, but there's a in my mind there's a point to art which goes beyond merely showing you something. I don't think art is merely to put something in front of us for us to view or gawk at. I do think that all art is supposed to lift us up to some greater truth and to beauty, which is not to say that all art must itself be pleasant to look upon, but it should bring us closer to some truth. That's my fundamental belief about art. And my problem is that so much of, and I agree that television shows, movies, all that can be art, but much of it, the vast majority of it, in my view, is not designed with that purpose in mind, and it does not have that effect. Instead, it brings you down into the muck, into the dirt. It's designed so you could gawk at whatever nudity and grotesque violence or whatever else. And I think also a lot of art these days is also just kind of, it brings you down into kind of misery and despair, and then just leaves you there. It just says, all right, well, see you later, and leaves you there in the despair. And it seems pointless to me. What's the point of that? And by the way, I say that as someone, I've watched plenty of shows and movies and so on, that have no effect besides that, because there is this weird draw to it as well that I recognize, but I think we need to resist it. And with Game of Thrones, I think Game of Thrones is an example. I've used that as an example. I think it's a good example of that. I haven't watched the show much myself because of this conviction I have about it. So it's possible that I'm wrong about that particular show.
It is interesting. I mean, my argument with this is that I actually enjoy sometimes a nihilistic work of art because I know nihilism is part of the creation. In other words, I know that people being nihilists is a point of view that exists in this world, in God's world. And it's not a point of view I share. It's a point of view I powerfully oppose. But I like to experience it to know my fellow man, I guess. I guess that's my argument. With Game of Thrones, it is funny because part of it is so exploitative and debased that it gets in the way of some of the things that are brilliant about it. So I see that point. Here's the last thing I want to ask you about, and this will really get you. I've been having I'm an Episcopalian, which is Catholic light. And I'm an Episcopalian for a very specific reason, but recently they've gotten so far left and crazy that I've talked about the fact that I really think I may have to leave the church. And a lot of people wrote to me saying I should become a Catholic. A lot of people wrote to me saying I should become a Mormon as well. Those were the two I got most from. Yeah. My problem with Catholicism, I'm going to put it in front of you and see what your response to this is. I feel that in the last analysis, my prayerful reading of Scripture, along with being informed by great theology. I'm a big Pope Benedict XVI fan, so I read his theology and I compare what I'm thinking. But ultimately, my conscience has to rule over the authority of the church. Why is that wrong?
I think that you do have to follow your conscience in the end, and that if you're, the distinction here is that there are things that are objectively wrong. I guess you would agree, right? That there are things that are objectively wrong and objectively right. And you could now theoretically, if you really feel your conscience is calling you to do a certain thing, and it turns out that thing is objectively wrong in the end, my belief, and also the Catholic belief, if you like, is that you did an objectively wrong thing, but your moral guilt would be severely mitigated in the eyes of God because you really thought that you were following your conscience. So I guess that's kind of the interplay between the authority of not just the church, but Scripture and your own conscience. Because when you talk about, you got to follow your conscience, there's also, you got to follow your conscience as opposed to the church. Well, then there's also Scripture as well. So, what if Scripture tells you do X, Y, Z, but you really feel your conscience taking you another direction? So you're going to run into that, even without the church. You could still theoretically run into that confusion. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, is that something that, if that happened to you, if you said, I've really prayed on this, I've thought about it, I've read Scripture, and I disagree with the church on this important issue, what would you do then?
I would recognize, ideally, if I'm doing the right thing, I would recognize that my own understanding is flawed. I'm a limited person. I have my own biases, my own temptations, and I would recognize that it's flawed, and I have to conform myself with this higher truth. The same as if I read something in Scripture. If I read, Jesus said a lot of very challenging things, and I might read some of those things and say, "Wow, I don't know if I can do that. It just doesn't make total sense to me." But I also realize that I have to humble myself to this authority and follow it, even if it doesn't make sense to me. And that, I would submit, in the end, is what faith is all about. It's about, walking forward to the light, even when you don't quite understand everything around you. And that's what it means to be a Christian, I think.
Matt Walsh, the host of the Matt Walsh Show here on the Daily Wire. It is great to talk to you. I love listening to you. I love reading your stuff. And I hope you come back. We'll talk again.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Matt.